to the Idaho Libertarian Candidate Roundtable discussion. So we're going to be talking about a number of different, actually we're going to focus on one issue. So with us, we'll work through them as we go, living and learning. That's how this happens, right? So I am Idaho Joe. I am your host. With me today, I have Mike Long from District 21, Jennifer Luoma from District 2, Idaho Law, a Congress for Idaho Law. He is running for U.S. Senate. And Paul Sand, he's our gubernatorial candidate. And let's go ahead and work our way around the circle. Take a few moments to introduce yourself, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Long. I live in Meridian. I'm the legislative candidate for District 21 here in Meridian. I believe it's a new district. There's no incumbents. I think there's a representation from every party in this particular race. So I've got quite a job ahead of me trying to convince everybody here that doing their own thing and minding their own business really is in their own best interest. And the authoritarians and statists that have wrapped themselves in a shroud of some sort of neoliberal something that I really can't identify. It borders on authoritarian light and theocratic conservative. Really doesn't have their best interest in mind necessarily. They've got their own best interest in mind, and they want to govern you from their perspective, their worldview, and their morality.
Okay. Robert's joining us. He's District 14 for the Idaho Senate. In the meantime, Jennifer, go ahead. A few moments to introduce yourself.
My name is Jennifer Luoma. I live in Big U, Idaho. It's super nice. I'm from Minnesota originally. I've lived here for 5 years. And I'm running for District 2 Seat B. Yes. That's about it right now.
Paul, our gubernatorial candidate, take a few moments.
I'm from Minnesota too, but I'm living in central Idaho, in the canyon areas of western and central Idaho, and it's a whole different climate than anyone else is used to. It's not supposed to be raining, but it is. I'm running for governor against the obvious choice that everyone expects to win. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently than we will, and I'll do something differently than everybody else will, in order to break the barrier against the establishment. So it's going to be a long, tough fight, and I don't plan to give up, but I'm going to do it slowly, carefully.
Excellent. So Idaho Law, and you dropped out. So we're going to give Idaho a few moments to come back in once he gets his connection back in place. Robert, we want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Robert Imhoff. I'm running for Idaho State Senate 14 against C. Scott Grow. It's going to be an exciting race. It's going to be an exciting race, and I'm very excited to be on the campaign trail and actively seeking the seat for Senate. I'm hoping to be the first Libertarian elected, or joining Mike, to be the first two Libertarians elected to the Idaho Senate. It's a very exciting time.
Okay, now some of you aren't familiar. We still have a few other candidates that are out there that haven't been able to join us yet this evening. One of those is Jon Basabe. He's out from District 24, running for for Idaho Senate, and he actually rounds out number 7. Idaho, you got a few moments? Want to talk about yourself? Your bandwidth isn't playing real nice with you right now, Idaho.
It's freezing. I'm seeing a frozen screen.
Not working.
Okay, we will have to come back because it definitely looks like you're going to drop out on us here in a moment, Idaho. So one of the big topics that we really wanted to get covered early was the issue of who did I lose?
Robert.
Robert. Okay. Nice. So one of the big issues that we want to talk about. There we go. Let's see if we can do this again.
Maybe you should sit. Where are you going to sit back for?
What you
I don't know
doing
if
here,
that's
Idaho?
I think it might be important to mention to everybody that Idaho is a rural state and our internet infrastructure isn't perfect everywhere outside of the urban areas.
There we go. I think we got you now, Idaho.
There it is. But it doesn't. Oh, now it's.
If not, leave it. It's awesome.
But it's great in the audio. It's like I can't understand them.
You could just
Okay.
because that or
There you go, Idaho. I'm seeing movement. No, James, we do not have 5G here. As much as I wish we did, it's only in select areas of the state. What makes it real interesting is a tech center, here in the middle of the Pacific Northwest inland, we got all these people moving in for tech jobs, and some of the places just don't have access to the kind of tech we need. Which again comes back to that issue that we wanted to talk about today, which is housing. Mike, you got some quick notes. You want to go ahead and hit those up real quick?
Oh, quick notes is not what I have. I'm obsessed with this stuff. It's the housing situation in Idaho is out of hand. We have become one of the least affordable places in the country.
Going off of Twitter.
There was a time,
So Twitter
maybe
connected to this thing.
eight years ago, where I thought, I'd like to move to Hawaii. So I went out there and said, "There's no way I can afford this." And coming back now in 2022, it doesn't seem as unattainable as it did at the time. The cost of land here is ridiculous, and I think a good part of that is attributable to just the volume of federal land that we have in this state. 63% of the state of Idaho is federal land that we don't have access to. We can recreate on it if we want to. There's a little bit of mineral and resource extraction that can be done on it, but for the most part, it's left in its natural state. And we collect some amount of money from the federal government in lieu of property tax value, but it's not available for development. We can't build a new city, just north of Boise, for instance, to take the overflow. We're limited to the south of Boise and Meridian by BLM land, and so you're really limiting the supply of land. And anybody with an elementary understanding of economics is when you limit the supply of a resource, especially a finite resource, the price goes up as the demand goes up. That's just natural. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when you're artificially constraining the supply by locking up that land or any resource for no other reason than we've decided we wanted to, then you're really creating a disservice to the people that want to live there and the people that already live there that can't afford to stay there. So as somebody running for state representative, that's an issue that I wouldn't mind addressing, but it's a very tricky issue because you've got a lot of people that really, really, really like having that public land. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for what I've already discussed. It creates tremendous cost and availability problems. So there's a balancing act. In a perfectly libertarian world, that public land might not exist. But maybe we don't achieve a perfect libertarian existence. Maybe we get really close, and those are some of the compromises we have to make.
Actually, the mining capacity of that land is actually pretty high.
Sorry, say that again?
So the mining potential in that land is extremely high.
Oh yeah, Idaho has a representative of every precious gemstone on the planet.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing, that we actually do have a lot of actual natural valuable resources to mine.
Oh yeah.
an operation up in Elk City is like $1 billion operation.
Oh, we've got gold, we've got molybdenum, we've got phosphate, we've got
We've also
tremendous
got
mineral.
the earth metals too.
Say it again.
We've got the rare metals too that we need for the future technologies.
Oh yeah, but we'd rather buy it from China so that they can destroy their environment under their environmental laws, so we can get it super duper cheap, and we don't see the externalities associated with that extraction. See, if we did that under our system of laws and our values, it would be done much cleaner and much safer. And then we're getting into environmental aspects. On a planetary scale, our system of mining and extraction is infinitely cleaner and infinitely safer than just about everywhere else in the world. But we want to pretend that we're being super green, and that results in exporting all of the death and destruction and pollution and filth to countries that are developing and don't have the same values that we do. So
now, and this is an interesting aspect as we start to look at it, because we're limiting land, we're limiting industrial capability. We have significant amount of federal land that we cannot mine on, and as you say, we have significant natural resources under them in rare earth minerals, potassium, uranium, thorium, which is one of those new things that's coming out as far as nuclear technology, and as far as your backpack nuclear battery. Thorium cars, the Cadillac has come out with a model type. So we're looking at all of these different things that this federal land won't allow us to do. Industry that's natural to America, that's natural to us, that would put us to work, allow us to get back to doing things with our hands on our land in a way that we want to keep it, so that we're not exporting and offshoring and outsourcing labor. So from a federal perspective, being able to create that environmental friendliness while being able to extract those resources for future use and being able to develop industry here in the state of Idaho, and this circles back to the issue: how do we house all of these people as we open up these industrial capabilities?
Exactly.
And Paul, one of the things you brought up here, you got a list here of housing deficiencies as they relate to issues. You want to go over that real quick for people?
Yeah, I guess so. The first three are just there's also social issues. My wife actually worked for the healthcare or social services operations, and these it touch these by the social changing our social behavior. Number D is where the problems really start to begin, is where you can't afford to pay for rent even though you're working. You're working, and maybe you're working a couple of jobs, you actually can't afford to live, and that's where the serious problems really begin to pile up. And you can't really fix the number A and B groups really very easily. But you need to start at D and then work on E, which is, if you want to actually own a house, you can't possibly afford one. And if you want to do something like gardening, you need some land. You need some land with some sunlight and water. And for the further up we go in this, or down the list we go. And so there's solutions at every level, but we have to figure out what they are.
Yeah. So for those of you who are having a little bit of trouble reading this, sorry about the screen. We got.
I'm not hearing anything.
Is that not me? Okay. We got about 8 different classes as far as people that are involved in housing issues all around, as well as the community types: standard, urban, suburban, rural. Community designs: traditional, alternative, experimental, and natural. Some of these community designs are everything from what Mike loves to classify as Dunbar communities, your Dunbar numbers, being able to break communities down into small enough size. Intentional communities, mixed income communities are an option. And then of course, design changes, where you're looking at spaceship Earth style, your old traditional mom and pop, nuclear family housing, or go even further back, multifamily housing. I'm going to close this out here so that we can actually get back to seeing each other. Anybody got any input on what we can do in the state of Idaho with regards to a number of these issues?
Well, there are a number of code sections and laws related to building on the state level that if we were to get rid of them or adjust them or seriously diminish them, it would open up a lot of possibilities that Paul was talking about with things like experimental and alternative housing models. We've got 150 some employees that cost us on the order of $19 million a year for the Department of Building Safety. People will argue, do you want unsafe buildings? No, I don't want unsafe buildings. But every county in Idaho has its equivalent office. And so if we were able to, say, shut down the State Department of Building Safety, keep the building codes, if that's what we decide to do as a community, and allow the counties to fully administer those as they already do. So we're duplicating efforts and we're duplicating costs. So, then each county could, in effect, establish its own set of building codes and what it can live with and what it can't. Maybe in an urban area like Boise or Meridian or Twin Falls, we need to have a more conventional building style because of the density. But maybe way up north, where your population density is 5 per square mile, 1 per 5 square miles, maybe you don't need any building codes at all. Maybe you leave it up to the individuals to build the kind of housing that they want to live in, and there's everything in between. And then, the people in a city or in a county could petition that layer of government that's closest to them and negotiate amongst themselves what level of risk they're willing to take, what sort of design they're willing to have in their community. But we're not really able to do that because we have this overarching state system that dictates to the counties and to the cities, these are your minimum standards that really aren't that minimum, because you're talking about a set of international building codes. And the further into the future we get, the further you go with things like integrated fire suppression in multi-unit residential dwellings, or what electrical code was safe last year all of a sudden isn't good enough anymore. We have to upgrade to some new system. But is that appropriate for every community? I don't think it is. So that's by finding those duplicated efforts and finding those top-down solutions and getting rid of them, we could really open up a lot of possibilities for innovation and for, smart people with capital to do smart things to solve real problems on a community level.
So, Mike, you're over in District 21. That is Ada County. That's Meridian area. Right. Robert, you're also Ada County. You're looking at District 14. That's Eagle. Now, Eagle and Meridian, they have two very different ways of approaching an awful lot of their problems, despite the fact that they're still very Idaho. And again, as Mike pointed out, Ada County does have the overarching authority and can literally say, no, you can't do it that way. What do you think, as far as what Mike's saying, you can work in the state legislature to apply to, District 14 and Eagle?
Yeah, and with the redistricting, it's District 14 will now be both Eagle and Emmett for clarification. So
True.
We literally have a suburban and very, a rural blend in this district. So we see it from both sides, and we see a lot of changes. And it's fascinating to see, like, we as libertarians say, do what's best at the most local level possible, which would be the individual. But people don't always see it that way. And in Eagle, it's no exception. We see our neighboring mayor in Meridian say, you know, build, baby, build. Let's do it. Let's have a top golf. Let's have a In-N-Out. Let's redevelop all of 10 Mile. And then here, we're like, you know, we can get more housing built faster if you guys just hired another approver to approve some of these plans. And they're like, no, we don't want to spend the money on hiring another planner to review these submitted plans. So they're kind of deliberately. So we have a bit of a schizophrenic approach at the local level in Idaho, or excuse me, in Eagle. I mean, on one hand, people don't want Avamore to be annexed into Eagle, but the city council wants Avamore, which is this neighboring community. They're running out of water, and they suddenly want to be part of Eagle, so they won't run out of water. But then Eagle doesn't want to speed up building housing to keep housing supply high, to keep prices from spiraling out of control. But then again, the city also just spent like over $1 million buying a house to refurbish it for another $1 million to then rent to Eagle residents for banquets. So our city here in Eagle, when it comes to housing, like, instead of spending $1 million on an improvement district, maybe they just bought a single house that nobody can actually live in. And then they're talking about in 20 years from now, we're having a ticking time bomb if we acquire Avamore, but it's a good idea right now. But then again, we have all these plots of 60, 80, 120 acre plots ready to develop to keep housing supply where it needs to be. And they won't hire anybody to actually go through the paperwork to green light these projects. So there's obviously interesting things happening in Eagle in that regard. Meanwhile, our neighbors to the south, you know, everywhere you look, they're starting, middle of, or just wrapping up a project. And to get back to the housing general topic that you brought up earlier, that I'd like to bring up, you know, if there's low-income housing, if there's emergency housing that people need, it's always fascinating to me to see things like the Interfaith Sanctuary, a private, not public entity. You know, in the global sense, we call these NGOs, right? Non-governmental organizations. You have an NGO that says, we bought it, we'll refurbish it, we'll put the people in there. And then the city of Boise, which is supposed to be the most sympathetic to people's causes, is saying, no, you can't do that. Or another construction company comes forward and says, you know, we were going to do 20 low-income condos in the city of Boise, but we were able to finagle the thing to meet all building codes, and we can get 35 units in here. And then the city of Boise comes back and says, no, you can't put 35 units because it won't be aesthetically pleasing the way that you retrofitted it. So they're actually turning down 15 low-income housing units in the city of Boise. And they're turning down a private nonprofit that's going to do emergency housing. And yet they purport themselves to be the leaders in all these special interest causes like this in the state. And they keep on saying no to everything. So I find that fascinating that our neighbors to the west are doing that. But in the city of Eagle and Emmett, they have their own issues as well with housing. There's certainly a lot of low-income opportunities here, but or middle income, like, hey, I just want to be a renter in an apartment, and that's fine for me for now. The residents of Eagle and the people that represent them on the board have no interest in greenlighting more dense apartments in our city, and that's also causing a problem too, that we're not really getting that mixed use. And it's hard as a libertarian to say, what can I do in the state senate, because you want everything done as locally as possible. So do we want to, at the state level, force the hand of Eagle and Boise to behave a little bit more like Meridian? Well, no. You don't want to penalize them because it's not your job to penalize them. But we can certainly look at Idaho law and say, well, what's getting in the way? Like what could just naturally incentivize these cities to just allow natural growth that wants to happen, you know? And there's been a lot of talk about property tax. So if we have certain caps on property tax, or the velocity in which property tax for residential units can go up, that might incentivize them to build, because if they can't just fleece whose house already got built, and they would have to allow more housing to be built so that they can get more local tax. That might be a clever, just off the top of my head, way of thinking of this. I don't have a full plan there, just some idea building here, right? That like there's probably something in the property tax code that can be manipulated to incentivize local municipalities to want to encourage the development that their city naturally wants to happen.
And this is actually an interesting aspect about Idaho law, because Idaho, unlike certain other states, has this concept of law here in the state that all power all power comes from the state itself. You know, it goes back to those old railroad days, whereas the railroad influence, and the state made everything happen so that the railroad had an easy way of going forth and doing whatever it was the railroad wanted to do. So there's an awful lot of, what is it we call it? The idea where the state can tell the cities, no, you can't do that. And we've seen that happen in an awful lot of legislation, where Idaho legislators go in and say, no, Boise, you can't regulate Uber, you can't regulate Lyft, you can't, and when they say, Boise, you can't do that, they do that as a blanket statement, and it literally means every city in the state, not just Boise. So when they say Boise, you can't do that, Eagle can't do it, McCall can't do it, Coeur d'Alene can't do it. So we continue to see this problem with the assumption of responsibility, who can do what. And Jennifer, you're up there up north in Coeur d'Alene area. Actually, your district's just outside of Coeur d'Alene. So
my district is huge.
Right, your district is huge, and it's largely rural and or wilderness.
Yep. 2.5 hours from the top to bottom. Yeah.
So what are you thinking as far as your housing issue? Because I know you're starting to see spillover into communities from Coeur d'Alene, growth from Spokane, people wanting to live in Idaho, and you do a lot of commuting back and forth across the river, across the bridge. What do you got?
Well, I don't know what, within the capacity of the office I'm seeking, what I could do. So we're going to just start there. So I don't like to worry about things I don't have to worry about. But I see an issue of it aging out here. That there's a lot of seniors, a lot of people over 50 that are moving into the community, but we don't have housing for younger people. And those are the people that we need to take care of us. So something has to happen, and I think it will take place organically as we age and have to, because something will have to be done. How it gets exactly done, I'm not sure. I would just go trick out the mall.
Yeah. James, you bring up an interesting point here. State's just going to have to bite the bullet and use tax dollars for why they're collected. And this is one of those things, is like, if you're collecting the tax, and you don't use it for what it's collected for, why aren't you just letting the people use it intelligently within their own community? And this goes back to one of the things Mike brought up. A developer said, hey, we can put 35, apartments in here instead of just the 20. That would have been a private investment. Instead, cities decided to use tax dollars to say, no, you can't do it that way.
Yeah, and I have something to add to James's comment there. You're absolutely right. The state has a housing authority. Title 50, Chapter 19 establishes it, and Title 3142 and 6762 all address these housing authorities and housing and finance associations, which are supposed to facilitate the construction and permitting for low-income housing specifically. I mean, in the purpose of the bill, it says specifically there's a need for low-income housing because housing is expensive, and the private private economy has failed to provide it. So the state of Idaho is going to assume that responsibility. And so, Robert, when you're talking about the city of Boise wants a certain aesthetic for a low-income housing project that could have put 35 people into an affordable housing, or there's other places that say, I don't want poors in my neighborhood. I don't want to build a 3-story or 5-story apartment building right next door to my R4 neighborhood or R2 neighborhood because it's going to bring down my property values. These are things that the state of Idaho collects taxes for and is supposed to apply through these housing authorities, through the county housing authorities, and through the housing and finance associations to address those issues, mitigate them, and make it happen so that there is housing available for low-income Idahoans who they say were living in squalor and unsanitary conditions, and the state was the only one that could handle it. But I don't see them handling it. I see money being taken. I see money being paid to employees and contractors and consultants, but I'm not seeing any significant construction of low-income housing.
And
That's it right there, Mike.
Yeah, Jennifer brings that up. That's an interesting thing. So back in Congress, and this is where I come into the local housing issue, because in Congress, there 1998, it was called the Faircloth Amendment. And what the Faircloth Amendment was, it essentially stripped the ability of these housing authorities to do things for the communities. Now, it didn't take away the ability of the cities and the counties to collect taxes for this purpose, but it restricted severely the ability of them to use those funds for what they told people they were collecting them for. Faircloth Amendment makes it so you can't build public housing anymore through a housing authority program. And there was a later one during Obama era that actually started the privatization process of the public housing. So now we got communities, housing authorities in the city that are now selling off properties they own to private interests so that private interests can manage the properties.
And I think that
from a congressional perspective, you're looking at, well, what's the libertarian thing to, well, one, it's not Congress to tell you whether or not your community can or cannot build public housing.
Yep.
Well, and then, I hate to be a little ad hominem here, but it's still worth pointing out because it's a great talking point for anybody that's paying attention. And it's not just Idaho. I don't mean to pick on Idaho, but it should be no surprise that in a state like Idaho that seemingly has a lot of housing issues that come and go, right? Like they're very severe housing issues and very unsevere housing. Like it's either we have a glut or we have a shortage, right? It's never something like balanced. And all you have to do is like look up the job description titles of the people in the Senate and the House, the state Senate and the state House. What are their job descriptions when they're not in the state and the House? And guess what? Over 50% of them have a direct or near direct interest in housing, in the real estate industry of some sort. So, like when you have over 50% of your representatives, where their priority number one is keeping their beak wet through their day job, and their day job is something to do with land, selling it, buying it, building it, developing it, consulting against it. That's a real problem, right?
We don't have a great record of protecting against conflicts of interest either.
That's right. So, and it's no surprise, but again, going to the point, you have Interfaith who says we're just going to have emergency housing, and then the city of Boise actively fights against them. But then magically, the city of Boise says, well, we have this great public-private partnership that we're ready to move forward with to do emergency housing somewhere else, but we're going to pay for it. A state mayor or city mayor, a city council person, how are they supposed to get credit for helping establish emergency housing if they didn't do it through the city? Not in their best interest. They can't say, I fit emergency housing in Boise if a private entity does it. So they fight against these private entities. So when you ask, you have Title 50 and it's supposed to allocate money or allocate resources But when somebody shows up to the table and says, "Hey, I got a plan," they're like, "This was just something we did to make people happy. The plan was to not have a plan, okay? And for us to come up with our only thing. Our plan was to say nobody's going to show up to the table and take us up on this, so we have to do it ourselves, right? That's their strategy. If you don't need them, then what are they worth, right? You know, like I'll defer back to a really old libertarian motto that's been used for over 30 years. You know, libertarians planning to take over the world and leave you alone, right? That's quite the opposite of our incumbents here in Idaho. You know, like we want to take over to just like fall asleep at the wheel and just like sleep on our desks at work and not pass any legislation and not add more
That's
bills.
true.
So,
Well, they do like that per diem, so there is that.
I'd rather be just complacent and doing nothing than what the current status quo is. You know?
Yeah, you know, I think the bottom line in this particular part of the conversation is that government has proven all the way back into the 60s, and with the amendment you talked about, Joe, these things came about because we had this spectacular idea of building public housing projects. We dumped tons of money into building these public housing projects. And then the governments that were in charge of managing and maintaining and administering the public housing projects just didn't do it. And they destroyed family. You know, basically the origins of these housing projects were racist to begin with. They had a lot to do with redlining and a lot of government interference in relationships and in markets. So, you know, of course, they're going to shut this program down because then you've got Caprini Green on the news with people being killed and the windows are falling out and the tiles are coming off the walls. And, you know, it's become the territory of drug gangs and everything else. It's all because it was given over to government to manage, and the government is incapable or unwilling to manage it correctly. But if you were to turn these things over to a private company entirely, you may get a better result. But then we can also look at military housing to see how that might go. You know, when I was growing up as a Navy brat, the Navy owned the housing. The base commander managed the housing, and the housing was pretty decent. It wasn't magnificent, it wasn't palatial, but it was clean and it was in good order. And now they've turned military housing over to government contractors who are paid exclusively by the government and overseen exclusively by the government and accountable only to the government. And they've been skimming money off of it. They don't maintain it. People are getting sick and disabled. Kids are getting sick. This is what happens when you let government manage something like this housing. So the real answer here isn't we need to get the government to do their job correctly and operate the housing authority perfectly. We need to get government out of the way. We, you know, as a society, we can establish a certain minimum set of standards and say, if you're going to be a housing developer that builds low-income housing, you have to meet a certain minimum standard of quality. We can do that, but there's no reason that the government should at all be involved in financing it or managing it or overseeing it. They're bad at it. They don't want to do it. And the kind of people that get into that business are thieves and liars. And that's not what we need to take care of the most vulnerable members of our community.
So one of the concepts as far as housing that came out was the idea of mixed income housing. This was a big thing back in the 70s in which some of the projects would have the big high rises. You know, you'd have lower income down on the lower, higher income up on the top. But you had people of all classes capable of handling enough stuff internally to the building where they could maintain it themselves. You know, you had housekeepers that lived on different floors. You had executives that lived on others. But everybody was involved in maintaining and upkeep and making sure that issues related to the housing were taken care of as part of the community. Now, and I'm not talking the kind of homeowners association that gets installed by the developer on the way out the door. You know, I'm talking actual people who live in the community, paying attention, who are helping, you know, neighbors helping neighbors and that sort of community building between everything that goes on. You know, Paul, you live up in Whitebird right now, and I realize that's a very rural community, but you've got experience across the spectrum. And as governor, having listened to us talk from a congressional level, from a legislative level, what you see is how you would motivate this process from the gubernatorial office.
Well, first of all, I want to just back up to where we were talking about the building codes and zoning. The state building division really takes care of things that are actually important, like hooking up to utilities. That you got to make sure that's done right. It's the building codes at the counties and the zoning at the county level is what makes things problems, because Idaho County has no zoning and no building permits and no building codes. You can just build as you want. Every county in the state should be like this. You get your state permit for your electric and your utility, your plumbing, and you have to have a permit to hook at the electric grid. You got to have probably it'd be nice to have a permit to hook to the sewer grid or the water grid, but still, that's all that they should worry about, is that your connections are safe and your house, if it burns down, that's your problem. And so, I didn't have to get any permits. I didn't have to ask anybody for permission. I didn't even need to have any inspections done, except for the electrical inspection, hook up the power to the grid. And I don't need an occupancy permit. I can just occupy anything I want to occupy without asking anybody for permission, without asking anybody for design approval, and without meeting anybody's standards. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody should do. Is just,
And on that note, Paul, I think
Idaho County thought it would be.
I think, if you're talking about building without permits and anything, you brought up an interesting point about the only permits you needed were from the plumbing, the state plumbing inspector and the state electrical inspector. Why doesn't that imply that your electric utility operator is too incompetent to handle that function? And why would they not want to be responsible for the condition of their grid by controlling what sort of equipment gets connected to it? So you could remove an entire layer of bureaucracy that way.
I know. The electric company ends at the meter, and they don't care about what you do after the meter. And so you have to build the rest of it, and it has to meet the standards that won't destroy the electric grid. You're responsible for everything beyond that meter. I mean, that's where their jurisdiction ends.
That's the way it should be. But my point is, you have an electric utility operator who is an expert in electrical. So why not dispense with the state level of inspector that is trained to cover the entire state, and just allow your electrical utility to take over with inspecting your work before they allow you to hook it up to their grid? I think that would be a decent way to go, and it would localize it.
It's not that easy. It's actually a very complex approval necessary to actually get from the meter to your panel. Once you're past the panel, then they don't care either. The section between the meter and your panel is the only section that the state cares about. And I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that.
Okay, let's go. We're at about 44 minutes here, and I think we're having it. We've done pretty good so far. Idaho Law, you got anything quick? I know you've been popping in and out, so I'm not sure where you're at with things. But as far as building codes, standards, and housing, zoning, you got anything quick as far as how you would deal with that at the senatorial level, U.S.?
Oh, you're muted, Idaho.
Give me a minute to take you off mute here, Idaho. You're muted yourself. You got to unmute yourself. You're still muted, my man. Yeah, you're muted. We're not going to be able to hear you. So with that, thanks everybody for joining us. Mike, give us a sign on.
Vote Libertarian. It's really the only way you're going to get all of the things you hate about the state off your back.
Amen.
We are not anarchists. We're not anti-government. We're pro-you, is what it comes down to. And if you don't like my idea of stripping away some rule or regulation, the great thing about libertarians is we're willing to negotiate allowing a community to solve its own problems in the way that it finds most appropriate.
Jennifer.
I think that what we're doing right now and opening up the discussion is the first step. And voting Libertarian is the only way to get out of this mess. Voting third party. Vote for a third party. Do not vote in any incumbents. They're all evil. Not all of them.
Robert, you got anything for us? You're muted, Robert.
Yeah, sorry, trying to find that mute button there. Yeah, I mean, the big thing is that, especially in districts like Mike's, Jennifer's, myself, at the state level, or at the state Senate level and state House level, there are more diverse people than not. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of Republicans in the state, but in our particular district, Republicans are like 52% of our district. So that means you're leaving almost half of the people's best interests in your districts on the table. There's a lot of Republicans that believe our message of things like Ron Paul revolution and that kind of stuff. And they're just not seeing it from their own party. And then there's a lot of Democrats, a lot of independents, a lot of Constitution Party, a lot of people that their party's not offered here in the state of Idaho that would love to see their views represented. And we have a real opportunity now to say, like, you know what, just because everybody tells you you're in a red state doesn't mean you shouldn't show up to the polls. Show up to the polls and prove to everybody that, like, you show up, you can get some real, Idaho is fiercely independent. Let's get some fiercely independent people elected in Idaho. So that's my final thoughts for myself.
Paul, what you got for us?
I can't agree more with what he just said. Of course, I seem to be losing my connection. Better get off here before it's too late.
Yeah. Now, say something quick.
We will win in November.
There we go. I love that.
Yes.
I love that enthusiasm. I love that energy. The will to win. Idaho Law, you got anything for us? You're still muted, man. I can't hear you. Your mic's not working. Tell you what. Okay, folks, we will be back in 2 weeks. Same bad time, same bad channel, talking about issues that concern you. Tell your friends, share this episode, let them know what we are thinking about making sure that they have the ability to maximize their personal influence on their lives. In the meantime, family, friends, community, see you guys all in 2 weeks.
Love you.
Thank you. How do you, Sean, are you still here?